I'm joined now by a man who knows Washington, D.C. very well. He was former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. Bill Smullen joining us now. Bill, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
So, I mean, as I said, you know D.C. very well. You've been in that Capitol building just countless amount of times. How are you feeling watching what's unfolded this afternoon, well into this evening?
Well, first of all, I've never seen anything quite like what I watched on television this afternoon. It was outrageous. It was embarrassing. And I think we need to have a better plan than we had today because we had virtually no line of defense against people who were violent. The president had incited them to go to the Capitol to protest. They had every right to protest, but they didn't have the right to commit a crime. And they committed that crime by breaching the Capitol, which is a fortress in its own right. But they chose to find ways to get into the building, and it was something that, quite frankly, I'm embarrassed about.
I'm sure this will be dissected many times over the next hours, days, weeks, months, years, probably decades. How'd this happen? How do you leave a building like that with representatives in there going through one of the most basic functions of our democracy and our Constitution and allow this to happen?
Well, last night I listened to the mayor of the District of Columbia, and she said she was going to call on the Metropolitan Police, the Capitol Police, the State Police, and the National Guard. And that didn't happen except for a handful of Capitol Police that tried to fortify the doors. They should have had the National Guard on the streets. When I was watching 30 minutes ago, the mayor stood up and said, we now are mobilizing the National Guard. That's fine. 3 hours late. So we had a plan. We just didn't execute the plan. I'm not sure why. The mayor will answer for this. To try to defend the inability to do what we should have done does not satisfy me. It was a plan that was last night in place, but was not executed today. We need to do a better job, but the National Guard could have done that, should have done that, and should have been on site early this afternoon.
Certainly a failure there, but I don't think anybody would dispute that you have to lay full blame at the feet of the President of the United States for this. He released a recording as this was going on, a statement telling people to go home that was sandwiched in between telling more of his lies about the election, that it was stolen and that he won in a landslide. I mean, what do you make of that at a time when he has to come together and call these people out who most people will know incited in the first place? He comes out with a statement like that.
Well, he incited them by, first of all, going to their rally and encouraged them to go to the Capitol building. That is unacceptable on his part. And quite frankly, I think it's an impeachable offense that he committed today. And someone suggested, well, we only have about 14 days left. There's plenty of time to do what's right. And if what is right is to call the president on the carpet, we should do that. And that's something that the Justice Department should be looking into this very, very moment.
What does impeachment do, though? Some people say, like you mentioned, Bill, I mean, we only have a couple of weeks left of him in office. What does impeachment do?
Well, impeachment would preclude him from ever running for the presidency again. It would probably preclude him from running for political office anywhere at any point in time in the future. He needs to be called out on this, and we need to restore a sense of leadership in this nation. We didn't have it today. We didn't have it on Capitol Hill. We weren't sure what those 12 or 13 senators who were going to object the Electoral College, they contributed to it in their own right. And then, of course, after the protest broke out, Ted Cruz sort of backed off and said he didn't anticipate this, and he called people to, to come to calm. So we created our own problem, both members of Congress and the president himself. We should hold both of those individuals, or all of those individuals, both Cruz and the president, accountable for what they did today. And that was to incite protest and incite violence. that violence is going to return to Washington on the 20th of January, I suspect. They were on the scaffolding, and I've been on that scaffolding back in 2001 when George W. Bush was inaugurated. That's where Joe Biden is going to be inaugurated on the 20th. I anticipate protesters being there on the 20th of January. We better have a plan for that, and we better put that plan in place. We need to have a presence, a uniformed presence, whether it's police or National Guard. And if we need more than the DC National Guard, the Defense Department can provide that. We should surround that building in ways that protesters who say they're going to come back armed are not able to do what they say they're going to do. We have got to restore a sense of, first of all, of lawfulness to this nation. We have lost control. And when you lose control, the only way to fix that is to find someone who is going to take control. And I think Joe Biden is our hope for the future in that regard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, Bill. I mean, how do we put this thing back together again whenever that day comes? Hopefully it's coming now and we figure out a way to do it. But how do we do that after what we've seen today?
Well, the old expression, sometimes when you experience crisis, you find opportunity to um, to conduct yourself in a different way, to restore order to a very bad situation. So I think what we need to do is a good bit of soul searching, not just overnight. They're going to install a curfew at 6 p.m. tonight until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning in Washington, D.C. We don't have to be scared here in Syracuse, thank the Lord, but we should have a concern for the people of Washington, D.C. And my son lives there and my grandchildren live there. And I told them yesterday, stay at home on a Tuesday, which they clearly have a sense of what to do when there's trouble like this brewing. So we need to take a good bit of time to uh, revisit what we didn't do today that we should have done, and we need to have a plan for tomorrow and for the near future. This is not going to go away. Joe Biden can't solve it just by saying, "I want unity." We have to solve it by bringing parties together, bodies together. When I say bodies, I'm talking about the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. They should have today, when they lost control of their chambers, they should have realized that they have not contributed rhetorically to making sense of what we need to do, which is the right thing in the future.
You always have a great macro view of things, obviously serving with the Secretary of State Powell. What does this say to the rest of the world? Clearly they're watching. I saw a tweet from Boris Johnson in the UK, obviously, where they're going through their own problems with COVID right now, as are we here. But, you know, what does this whole scene say to the rest of the world about the United States?
Well, we talk a good game about what democracy should be for third world countries. Those countries and virtually countries around the world are looking at us. They're shaking their head. In some cases, they're probably laughing at us because we aren't America as we say we are, or that they have found us to be in the past. We need to not just change course, but we need to have a, a sense of direction that will put us back on the map as a democracy that people should aspire to be themselves. The whole world is watching, and I would just say I'm embarrassed with what they are seeing of us.
More than embarrassed, though, are we at some sort? Are we more vulnerable today than we were yesterday to nations around the world?
Well, terrorism is clearly a problem for us and will continue to be. International terrorism has been something that we have watched since 9/11 and we have guarded against. Now we have a problem with domestic terrorism, and this was in full force today. We need to do something about it. And the only thing that you do when you have terrorism in your midst is to use force and to use verbal warnings that if those warnings are not uh, heeded, that there will be consequences. We ought to arrest a lot of those people who are still on the Capitol steps at 6 o'clock tonight and put them in jail. And we ought to have a plan for tomorrow and do the same thing tomorrow. And if they're on the streets of DC tonight, we ought to arrest them as well. I'm guessing we have plenty of room for them in the jails in DC, and we ought to fill them.
Last one for you. Despite the scenes we've seen at the Capitol, we also saw in November a man, Joe Biden, get more votes than anybody else for president in the United States. We also saw in Georgia, unbelievably to many, that Georgia got flipped to 2 Democratic senators. So despite what we've seen in Washington, D.C. and the storming of the Capitol, what does it say to you about those wins in November, the wins here in January in the Senate in Georgia?
Well, a huge statement on part of the American people who cast their votes in November. And I'm very, very proud of Georgia for what they have done over the last 2 days. We now have, or will have 2 new Democratic senators, which will make it 50-50, 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. The vice president, of course, can break a tie. The fact that you'll have a Democratic president, a very narrow margin, but a Democratic House of Representatives, and now virtually a Democratic Senate. You're going to have a new speaker of, a new majority leader, and that's going to be Chuck Schumer. So I think we have a lot going for us. I want those people to clearly come together as a coalition and decide how to move forward in lockstep so that all of those bodies, Senate, House, White House, the administration at large, take this country to a more solid footing, and that we can have something that we can call ourselves proud of.
Bill Smullen, you know how much I always enjoy our conversations. I can't thank you enough for joining us and breaking down what we've seen.
Most welcome, Jeff. Thank you.